Today we'll be heading to the West Coast and getting into a 101 guide for Disneyland Resort. Hello and welcome to the Let's Go to Disney podcast. I'm Oliver.
And I'm Lucy.
Today is Sunday, April 26th, and you're listening to episode 137, Disneyland Resort 101. Before we get into today's main topic, here's what's going on in the parks right now. Disney announced an opening timeline for Disney's Lakeshore Lodge, which will be Disney's newest resort and DVC property when it does open to the public. So the current projected opening date is slated for the summer of 2027. Now, given that construction can ebb and flow, right, and timelines have a tendency to kind of, change as time advances, obviously this could change as well. But really, it is still exciting to think about that in just over a year from now, we could have a new resort on property. Reminder that this is on Bay Lake, so it's not far from Wilderness Lodge and Fort Wilderness. It's not going to be on the monorail. It's actually nowhere near the monorail, but we can safely assume that it's going to be accessible by boat. Disney did share some video footage of the construction progress, and things appear to be moving along really, really well. Disney Imagineering shared a closer look at their revamped queue for Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets. So there's a whole area dedicated to the Great Gonzo with a bunch of props and decor kind of strewn all around the space. You can still see the guts of the old ride area. So think that metal fence with the brick wall kind of all around. But it looks distinctly, I would say, more colorful and just vibrant in there, which is definitely just more in line with the Muppets, right? Mm-hmm. And that's going to be a welcome change because it was kind of dark and dingy in there. It was, yeah. And I think that went with the theming, but yeah, now it's Muppets, right? And it won't be much longer because it's opening on May 26th, right? So we're really looking forward to just seeing the first impressions.
In Disney Cruise Line news, they announced a new deal named the Together at Sea Savings, and you are actually going to be able to save 50% on kids' cruise fares on select sailings between October 1st of 2026 and March 27th of 2027 when you have two full-priced fares for two adults. We actually already checked and we don't qualify for this because we actually used placeholder savings that was actually bumped up from 10% to 25%. So we've actually already saved more than what this deal would give us in total.
Yeah, for sure.
But it is still a great deal.
Because we had a nice surprise. I'm not sure if we ever mentioned this, but we booked our cruise with our placeholder after we got off the Wish. It was a little while ago now already, but we got an email from Disney Cruise Line just I would say it was 6 weeks ago or so now, or maybe a month ago. And we had an additional 15% savings on the sailing, which saves us it was $1,300 US. Yeah. So that was a super nice surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But if you are thinking about sailing during this time or you've already got one booked, definitely check with your travel agent or with the Disney Cruise Line directly to see if this deal applies to your sailing. And then a friendly reminder that Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is finally reopening, and that's in 1 week from today on Sunday, May 3rd. So if you've got a trip coming up soon, make sure to head on over to Frontierland to ride the newly reimagined and reopened attraction. That's exciting news for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, let's get into today's main topic, which will be an overview of Disneyland Resort over in California. So we obviously talk about Walt Disney World a lot, right? But we do like to give some love to the West Coast parks, just every now and again. And this week we're switching gears and we'll be getting into an overview of just the Disneyland Resort as a whole. And it's going to be very beginner friendly today. Okay, so basically everything you should know as you kind of start to plan your visit to the happiest place on earth, right? Because Disneyland is the happiest place on earth. And Walt Disney World is the most magical place on earth.
We're going to keep things pretty simple today. We'll keep things bite-sized so it doesn't get too overwhelming. Although I do find that planning Disneyland is not as involved as planning Disney World, like Walt Disney World, but we're going to get into that. So number one, we're going to start off with some key differences between Walt Disney World and Disneyland. So we've talked about some of the main differences between the two resorts, but if you visited both, the most glaring thing that separates the two destinations is obviously its size. Disneyland, when it comes to surface area, is just much, much smaller than Walt Disney World. So if you were to pull it up on Google Maps, you can see pretty plainly that everything at Disneyland is confined to a relatively small area with the city of Anaheim surrounding it on all sides and then immediately outside of its gates and berms. I remember the first time walking to Disneyland. Across the street, there was a Jack in the Box and an IHOP, but then there's Disneyland right there. Yeah, so it's kind of weird, especially comparing it to Walt Disney World for sure.
Yeah.
Like I said, whereas if you were to look at Walt Disney World on the map, you would basically be looking at a city with a lot of space in between the parks, resorts, and then the other offerings like Disney Springs, golf courses, and the water parks.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually a stark difference, like you're saying, right? I think a lot of people, especially Disneyland locals, underestimate just how big Walt Disney World is if like they've never been, because it is massive, right? It's the size of the city of San Francisco, right? That's what it's always compared to because, in surface area, that's literally what it is.
Mm-hmm.
There are 4 theme parks at Walt Disney World, so Magic Kingdom, Hollywood Studios, Epcot, and Animal Kingdom, plus the 2 water parks, so Typhoon Lagoon and Blizzard Beach. Disney Springs is the shopping and dining district, and there's over 30 Disney Resort hotels proper, plus a bunch of other good neighbor hotels, and then like other hotels on top of that, right? So it's massive. In comparison, Disneyland Resort has 2 parks, so Disneyland Park and Disney's California Adventure, 3 resort hotels, which are the Grand Californian, Disneyland Hotel, and Pixar Place, plus the downtown Disney area, which is their shopping and dining district.
Yeah, that's right. And then, like Oliver was saying, Walt Disney World is massive, and it's got an extensive complementary transportation system that includes buses, boats, a monorail, and a Skyliner, which is that gondola system that you'll see kind of like at a ski resort. Whereas at Disneyland, you can literally walk everywhere from the resorts, downtown Disney, between the parks. Everything is walkable, and it doesn't take too long to get to any 2 points anywhere on property. So if you are staying at one of the 3 Disney resorts and lots of the hotels around the resorts as well, you can just easily walk to and from the parks.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, like the planning complexity as well, I would say is just a lot less at Disneyland.
Yeah.
So just getting to the parks is easier. Getting back to your resort is also easier and just generally faster, right? Unless you've opted to stay a little further out. Lightning lanes work like Genie Plus used to. We'll get into that. The dining scene is just much more straightforward. If I had to compare it to another resort, like in terms of planning experience, I'd say it's actually closer to Universal Orlando Resort than Walt Disney World. And that's not a slight, right? It's just that Disneyland does allow for a little bit more of that spontaneity, I guess you could say. And you can get away with a little less planning over there for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So next up, let's talk tickets and then general park setup. So like we said, everything is walkable. So as you know, for first timers or people who don't visit often, we always suggest to keep 1 park per day tickets over at Walt Disney World, unless you have less than 4 days and you have no choice but to double up. But then at Disneyland, park hoppers just make sense for anybody. And really, it's just because it's so easy to park hop. You literally walk out of one park and you can see the gates to the other park. And then that's it. A couple of minutes walk and you are there. Park hopping is just so easy and convenient, and you don't have to be super knowledgeable to take advantage of this benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we would never not get park hoppers at Disneyland for that reason alone. It just makes much more sense, like Lucy said, for anybody that's visiting there. Now, one thing that's still in place over at Disneyland is park reservations, and that's for everybody, right? So after the pandemic closures, both parks had theme park reservations, right? So you had to make reservations to visit a park, or Walt Disney World rather dropped that like a long time ago now. That's still in place for annual pass holders, but that is still in place for date-based tickets at Disneyland Resort. And not only that, but there is still a park hopping restriction of 11 a.m., meaning you can't hop like to Disneyland from DCA or vice versa before 11 a.m. Now, important to note that this is as of this recording, because some people might be like, wait. And yeah, so Disney did say that they will be dropping this time restriction on park hopping, meaning that guests are going to be able to park hop as soon as they scan into their first park. Disney has not said exactly when this is going to come into effect, but it is expected to be sometime in 2026. So as of this recording, that 11 a.m. requirement still exists. But yeah, Disney did say that they're going to be lifting that. We just don't know exactly when at this point.
Yeah, that's right. And this is really just going to give back even more spontaneity to your Disneyland visit, which is already a lot more flexible to start with, in our opinion. So this is actually great news for both locals and guests planning their first visit or their first visit in a very long time. If you want to go in, ride one ride and then switch parks, or you see that one park is super busy, you can hop on over to the other one as early as you want, which is just nice to have as an option for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And on that note, tickets are fairly similar. So you have your single day or multi-day options, and you can add park hopper as well. Although this is an add-on versus a different ticket category like it is over at Walt Disney World. You can also add Lightning Lane when you purchase your tickets too, or just purchase it the day of your visit. There is no advantage to purchasing it in advance, except for maybe the price, but that could go either way, really.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Because MultiPass has dynamic pricing, just like it does at Walt Disney World, right? So if you purchase it in advance, it could be more or less expensive than what you paid for it on the day of your visit, right? And obviously, you're not going to know that until you actually get closer to your visit.
Yeah.
Now, if you purchase it in advance, you purchase it for the length of your ticket, right? But if you buy a day of, then you can buy it for just the day, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. Another thing too is you don't get advanced selection at Disneyland, and there are no tiers either like there is at Walt Disney World. So it basically works exactly like Genie Plus used to work. So at Disneyland or DCA, you can make your first selection as soon as you enter the park, and you can only make one selection at a time, and you can then book your next selection when one of two things has happened. One, you've used your current selection, or two, 2 hours has passed since you made your last selection, right? This is the part that works exactly like Genie Plus.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, we do prefer this way. And then we also used to have huge success getting Lightning Lanes back when it was Genie Plus, and refreshing for earlier times is alive and well over at the West Coast. So we are definitely pro that Genie Plus version, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
And again, it's that spontaneous angle, right? Instead of booking 3 Lightning Lanes in a park 3 or 7 days ahead, depending on if you are staying at Walt Disney World, at Disneyland, you can be just that more nimble and then book a couple of Lightning Lanes in Disneyland, then hop on over to Disney's California Adventure and book a few more over there. The experience, once you're in the park, isn't all that different because you can still book in other parks and then refresh for better times just like at Walt Disney World. It's just easier to do so in Disneyland Resort given their current system.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. All right. Next up, let's get into park breakdown. So Disneyland Park is the OG park, right? It opened way back in July of 1955. It's the park that started it all. And every Disney park to open since has benefited from its innovation and just the example set by it since.
Absolutely.
So it's got some exclusive attractions that are classic and they're not found anywhere else in the world. And it's also the only park where Walt physically walked the streets, right? So it holds a very special place in a lot of Disney fans' hearts for that reason alone. The first time personally that I stepped foot in Disneyland, I had an emotional reaction, right? I was a little bit overwhelmed because I knew that Walt had walked down.
He had a hand in every part of that place.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
And like, of course, he had a hand in Walt Disney World. He just never saw it complete, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that, you know, when you walk into Disneyland, you walk into Walt's park where he physically was and spent lots of time, it's very special. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it just has that classic Disney feel. It's such a special place. If you are a Walt Disney World regular, the first thing you are definitely going to notice is that it's familiar, right? Like there's a lot of parallels between Disneyland Park and Magic Kingdom, but everything is just a little smaller. Town Square is a little smaller, the sidewalks are a little narrower, and the castle, it's a lot smaller. It's probably shockingly smaller.
Yeah.
I went to Disneyland the first time ever out of any of the parks, so for me, I didn't know any better. So seeing Magic Kingdom's castle, definitely a big difference.
For sure. It's not bad, but it is a stark difference. Yeah. And then when you compare it to DCA, it has a lot more attractions, right? Especially classics like Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Peter Pan's Flight, Snow White's Enchanted Wish, Alice in Wonderland, and several others. You also have exclusives like the Matterhorn, Storyland Canal Boats, Indiana Jones, and then you have rides that are found in other Disney parks like Space Mountain, Pirates of the Caribbean, and Haunted Mansion.
With a little bit of twist on each one, right?
For sure. So like exactly right. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, the vast majority of Disneyland rides are better than the Walt Disney World versions. Now, don't get me wrong. You all know I absolutely love Walt Disney World. That's my home court, right? But I just love like the look of the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, like the outside of the building itself.
Totally.
And then the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay is just like unreal. So good. And then Space Mountain is just way more smooth. Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway has a better queue. Like It's a Small World's facade is like Chef's Kiss. It's just so beautiful compared to like the carnival
the
look.
one in Magic Kingdom isn't beautiful. And by any means, it's just a building.
Like the ride itself is still very similar. But
Yes.
yeah, the outside of It's a Small World is just so pretty in
Absolutely.
Disneyland. Yeah.
There's just something extra special about that attraction in the original park.
Agreed. Yep.
As much as we love Magic Kingdom, and we do, the attractions are just typically better and prettier over there in California.
Agreed.
And Disney's California Adventure opened much later in February of 2001. I was actually there with my family in March of 2001, just a few weeks after it opened. I actually didn't realize it at the time, and it's much, much different than it is nowadays.
Yes.
They have changed a lot of that stuff over there.
Yeah.
The park is much more modern in a lot of ways, and some of the attractions have received upgrades over the years, including Guardians of the Galaxy, Mission Breakout, which used to be Tower of Terror, and Incredicoaster, which used to be California Screamin'. DCA also hosts the festivals throughout the year, so that's including Food and Wine, Festival of the Holidays, Lunar New Year, and this is also the park that hosts Oogie Boogie Bash, which is the Halloween party that somewhat similar to the Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween party over in Magic Kingdom.
That's right.
It's a very popular one, I think, that Oogie Boogie Bash.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's super popular. It's harder to get tickets for Oogie Boogie than it is for
Yes.
Mickey's Not So Scary. And
it's well done too, from what we've heard.
For sure. But yeah, DCA is where all of those kind of events are held. It also has Avengers Campus, which is currently being expanded. It definitely has I would say a much different feel than Disneyland Park. And if I was pressed to find a park to compare it to at Walt Disney World, I'd say it's kind of like a mix between Hollywood Studios for like the rides and Epcot for like the festivals and stuff. You know what I mean?
That's actually perfect. Yeah, absolutely.
It doesn't have the same nostalgia as Disneyland. And initially the park was kind of a letdown. Like if you've watched the Imagineering story, they covered it in detail.
Not that I knew any different, but I remember my family preferring to be over at Disneyland and we preferred to be over at DCA, which probably isn't the case anymore because they've done such a good job of revamping it.
I think a lot of people do love DCA, and of course Disneyland will always be the original, but like it's come a long way since 2001 for sure. I would say now it's like a true Disney park, and it does have a lot to offer.
True.
In terms of number of attractions here, there is a lot less than across the Esplanade over at Disneyland, but there are still some great attractions and heavy hitters here that should definitely be prioritized during your visit for sure. All right, next up, let's talk transportation and resorts. So these are two of the biggest differences between Disneyland and Walt Disney World. So like we said earlier, Walt Disney World has an extensive complimentary transportation system, whereas Disneyland, you're kind of on your own and your own 2 feet. And that's more than likely enough to get you kind of everywhere you want to go, right? If you're staying at one of the Disney resorts, like we said earlier, that's Grand Californian, Pixar Place, or Disneyland, you're within walking distance to everything. So yeah, like not far at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And then unlike Walt Disney World, the city of Anaheim surrounds the resort. So there are actually a ton of Good Neighbor hotels and third-party hotels that are within walking distance to DLR. And you can certainly save a lot of money staying off property and still being very close in distance. That's what my family did. I remember that back in 2001. We stayed at I can't remember which hotel it was, but it was closer to where the Anaheim Mighty Ducks, although they're not the Mighty Ducks anymore, played.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so the Disney bubble that we sometimes talk about when we're talking about Walt Disney World doesn't really exist in the same way at Disneyland. You definitely get a bit of it by staying at a Disney resort, the 3 that Oliver mentioned. But if you're staying outside of these, there's definitely a bit of a break in the magic that is mostly kept intact when you're at Walt Disney World, because on the East Coast, there is absolutely nothing around for miles and miles except for the things that Disney specifically has put there.
Exactly, 100%. Yep.
But having said that, we should mention that there is a monorail at Disneyland Resort that takes you from downtown Disney to Tomorrowland. It's actually fun to ride it, just to say that you did, but it's definitely not a must like it is over at Walt Disney World if you are staying, especially if you're staying at a monorail resort.
Sure.
And even if you're not, it's still a fun ride to do.
Absolutely. But like you bring up a good point, because it's not like, you know what I mean? It does get you from downtown Disney to Tomorrowland. I don't think it's more than like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But like at Walt Disney World, if you're staying at, Grand Flow, Poly, Contemporary, it just makes sense to take the monorail if you're going to Magic Kingdom or Epcot for that matter.
And it's smaller too. Oliver was recently in Disneyland with a bunch of his friends.
The doors, yes, thank you.
And he smoked his head.
The door.
And I think his other friend smoked his head too.
There was definitely back to back. So the doors, are a lot smaller, right? So the first, just to get into the story. So the first time I took the monorail at Disneyland, so I was just so used to the doors at Walt Disney World that I smoked my head on the top of the doorway, and I was actually filming it because I wanted to capture the moment, right? So I'm kind of filming my feet and it just thunk, and you can hear it on the video. And then my friend who was just getting into the other doors, literally 3 seconds before I hit my head, I heard him hit his head. So I was like, oh no, that sucks. And then I do the exact same thing.
So something to keep in mind, it is smaller if you are used to the Disney World monorail.
They're much more spacious at Walt Disney World.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah. So anyways, long story short, if you're a Walt Disney World regular, fair warning.
Yeah.
But like we've been saying, right, if you're staying at Pixar Place or Disneyland Hotel, you're not far from the parks and downtown Disney at all. So you can take the monorail, but everything is walkable. And yeah, but again, like that to me is the biggest pro of Disneyland Resort as a whole, right? It's nice and compact and it's just super easy to get around for sure. And then for resorts, another thing that we should mention that we didn't really talk about so far yet is that there's really not a lot of benefit to staying on property at Disneyland like there is at Walt Disney World. So especially since they lifted the early entry benefit for resort guests very recently. So unless staying in the Disneyland bubble is super important to you, you can easily save a couple $100s a night and still be at a hotel within walking distance with the same relative experience as staying at a Disney resort, right? So while we would always recommend staying at a Disney resort at Walt Disney World because there's just so many different options for different budgets, and there's also a ton of perks like early entry, booking your lightning lanes early, right, at 7 days versus 3, making all of your dining reservations at 60 days for every day of your stay, right? There are no such benefits at Disneyland, right? And the 3 hotels that do exist are all equivalent to deluxe pricing at Walt Disney World. So there are no like moderate or value options. It's just everything's expensive.
Yeah, that's right. And honestly, in good conscience, we can only recommend it if it's within the budget, and being as close as possible to the parks is an absolute must for you. Otherwise, there are a ton of options there.
That's right.
Another thing that is really different here is that there isn't nearly as many table service restaurants, and then by extension, advanced dining reservations aren't as crucial. Not only that, but generally speaking, their quick service restaurants are superior here as their churros are. And I've heard that from many people saying that.
Yep.
There's just something about Disneyland churros that are just so much better than anything you're going to find over at Walt Disney World.
Can confirm. Yep.
So in terms of reservations, the model is similar in that advanced booking. You can make dining reservations up to 60 days in advance via the Disneyland app or website. You do need a credit card to make a reservation. You must cancel at least 2 hours before your reservation to avoid a no-show fee, which is $10 per person, just like at Walt Disney World. And then some of the most popular reservations are the Blue Bayou, Lamplight Lounge, Carthay Circle, Napa Rose, Storytellers Cafe, just to name a few.
Yeah, that's right. So while the dining scene is a lot different, if you have some place that you really have your heart set on, right, and you really want to make sure you get a chance to dine at, make sure you're on at 60 days trying to snag that reservation so that you don't miss out. Outside of that, though, you have some stellar quick service restaurants at Disneyland that rival the Walt Disney World restaurants easily, especially when you compare it to the in-park options. Bengal Barbecue for some delicious skewers is really, really good. Jolly Holiday for some really good sandwiches. Tiana's Palace for those, Southern comfort options, plus the beignets. Rancho del Zocalo for delicious Mexican fare, among many, many other options. Plus, you have some awesome snacks that you're only going to be able to find here, like the churros we were alluding to, right? Get a Disneyland churro if you're down there. The churro toffee, which I won't say is life-changing, but it is super delicious. Really, really tasty. You also have the Matterhorn macaron. This is a classic. The cheesy garlic pretzel bread, among many, many more. A lot of people are going to tell you that the food is better at Disneyland. And I'll be slightly controversial here. I don't fully agree with that. I think there is a ton of great food for sure, but you can also find a lot of great options at Walt Disney World.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. In our opinion, it's not that everything is so much better. It's just that there's enough options that differ enough from what we're used to seeing at Walt Disney World that it just keeps things fresh and interesting when we do visit the West Coast. And then personally, we like that. It's fun that you can experience something you only can experience at Disneyland, and it just adds to the reasons to visit both resorts.
For sure.
And then, like we said, just outside of that bubble, across the street, essentially, there's restaurants galore.
Yeah.
So it's not like you are stuck there either. If you're looking for savings, you can stay off property and eat off property. It's right there. You can't do that at Disney World. There's no off property restaurants.
You can, but you would definitely need to rent a car.
You do. And so that's just, if you're staying on resort, it's hard to just go off property to eat.
Yes.
Whereas it's right across the street, literally.
No, for sure. And there is some okay options in Anaheim, but I think that there's still a ton of good food.
I would agree.
On Disneyland
I'm just saying
property.
If people are looking for budgets,
yes,
maybe that Jack in the Box is still across the street.
Yeah, I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. Yeah.
Next up, let's talk strategy differences. We alluded to this earlier, but there is no need for intense planning or planning that's as involved over at Disneyland Resort. MultiPass is easier to use in our opinion. It works exactly like the old Genie Plus, and it just gives you space for much more flexibility and spontaneity.
Yeah, exactly right. And like we were just saying, there's less stress for dining. Making your lightning lane selections at 7 or 3 days is not a thing, right? So you don't need to plan your whole itinerary around one park. You can kind of just free flow it a bit more, right? Park hopping is just that much more feasible. Even for families with young children, right? It's super easy to just walk across. So yeah, it just feels much easier. We will say though that just like Walt Disney World, there is a huge benefit to rope dropping specifically. So if you can arrive early for a rope drop and be near the front of the pack, you can definitely get a few attractions done in the early part of the day, kind of as guests continue to trickle in like mid-morning, right? So we would still spend a bit of time planning which park you're going to be like starting your day at, and you still have to make park pass reservations.
Yep.
So, right. And then which attractions you're going to head to first. But after that, the day opens right up and then you can book lightning lanes as you go and hop to and from, Disneyland and DCA kind of as you see fit.
California's always been known for chiller vibes from what we've heard. So it kind of fits with Disneyland as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't feel the same level of stress or just urgency at Disneyland than I do at Walt Disney World. And don't get me wrong, like I said earlier, right? You all know I absolutely love Walt Disney World. There's just much more of a relaxed atmosphere. And I would just say that your whole vacation planning experience as a whole is just a little bit less stressful.
Absolutely. Next up, who should choose Disneyland? Well, the short answer is everyone. We seriously think that as the original park, you should definitely visit this at least once in your life. It's kind of a rite of passage in our opinion. But if you are looking at both resorts and wondering which one to prioritize first, here is a couple of things to keep in mind. If you live on the West Coast or Western Canada, it's just geographically closer. So that just makes more sense for that reason alone. Outside of that, if you have really young kids, the overall size of Disneyland Resort may be more appealing and you don't need as many days to get a really good visit in.
That's right, yeah.
So for example, if you can do a 3-night, 3-day visit with park hoppers and get a lot done, that is really, really nice when you have the little ones who just tire quickly.
Absolutely, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And just like Magic Kingdom, right? Disneyland Resort has a lot of rides and shows that are perfect for young families, right? So think things with no height requirement.
Yeah.
There's a lot at Disneyland to do. So that's really good for little ones. And then outside of that, if you only have a short time for a trip, like a weekend or something, right? You can definitely do that reasonably well at Disneyland, whereas at Walt Disney World, you're going to barely make a dent, right? So Walt Disney World is definitely better to visit when you have more time on your vacation. And by extension, if you're not much of a planner and you're looking for kind of an easy, straightforward experience, we'd say that that's a dangerous game. But if, a little preparation always goes a long way. But what I'm saying is that you're much more likely to get away with that if you're visiting Disneyland versus Walt Disney World.
Yeah. And then even like in a week span, if you had 7 days, you could get their Universal Studios done as well. Which is a whole other episode that we'll have to get into because
like
it differs.
Universal Hollywood?
Exactly. Because it differs completely from, not completely, but it differs from the Florida version of Universal Studios.
I would say that even 7 days is a long time.
To do even all 3 parks kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything to offer.
Because if you have 4 or 5 days at Disneyland and DCA, that's a good amount of time. And then you only need 1 day, I would say, at Universal Hollywood. So 7 days, you can definitely get a lot of mileage for your time, right?
You can.
If you have 7 days, what we're saying is that, Walt Disney World has a lot to offer. And then
you feel like you're still missing some things.
In 7 days. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And also, if you are a Walt Disney World regular and you've been several times, branch out. Might as well. Disneyland Resort is similar enough that it's just going to give you those familiar experiences, but different enough that it's going to also give you something completely new, which is very exciting. Mm-hmm. Like I said earlier, everyone should visit Disneyland at least once.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly.
So in closing here, let me ask you this. If you're used to Walt Disney World, what would surprise you the most about Disneyland?
I think it's what you touched on earlier, and I think it's the size.
Yeah.
Right? That's what struck me most the first time I visited, right? Everything is just super close and walkable, which is such a stark difference from the experience that I'm used to at Walt Disney World, right? Walking into Disneyland too is kind of an eerie experience because it feels like Magic Kingdom, but it's different in significant ways. And like I said earlier, the entrance and town square is just a lot smaller. The streets and the sidewalks are just a little bit narrower, right? And then Sleeping Beauty Castle is just itty bitty. Okay, and don't take that to mean it's bad, right? She's absolutely beautiful, but there's no doubt that when you're used to seeing Cinderella Castle, it just hits you in a big way. You're kind of like, well, where's the rest of it, right?
Yeah.
But once you get past Main Street, like past the castle, things do get pretty different back there. Like, New Orleans Square, Toontown, Fantasyland. It's just quite different over at Disneyland than it is at Magic Kingdom.
So true.
But yeah, like there is like, that's the thing. It's like, it feels familiar, but different. And aside from that, it's just a phenomenal experience, right? It's a beautiful resort as a whole. And like Lucy said, it's a must at some point in your life. You should definitely be visiting Disneyland Resort.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. So just to recap quickly, by and large, the experience is simpler, smaller, and more spontaneous, which can actually really appeal to a lot of folks, us included every once in a while.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Totally. With that said, thank you for joining us today to talk Disneyland. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. And as always, if you could leave us a rating and review, it would be greatly appreciated. If you choose to do so, you can leave reviews right on Apple Podcasts. And for Spotify, you can leave a rating.
You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Go.to-Disney, as well as on our Facebook page, Let's Go to Disney. We share some helpful reels here as well as some fun ones. The link tree in the show notes will take you to all of our socials.
Have a great day, and we'll see you real soon.